What happens when crime stops being chaos and becomes business? Al Capone ruled Chicago with fear. Lucky Luciano built a silent empire that still echoes today. Two gangsters, two methods, one dark legacy. Which one truly changed the game? In the shadow of America's Prohibition era, two names rose above the rest: Al Capone and Charles "Lucky" Luciano. They didn't fight side by side. In fact, their worlds rarely collided. But together, they shaped the face of organized crime in 20th century America. Alphonse Capone was born in Brooklyn in 1899 to Italian immigrant parents. He was American by birth, but street-bred and hard-edged. By the mid-1920s, he ruled Chicago's underworld. Bootlegging was his empire. At the height of Prohibition, Capone controlled an operation earning over $100 million a year, backed by more than 600 armed men. He wasn't subtle, his message was fear, and he delivered it with bullets. Meanwhile, Charles Luciano, born Salvatore Lucania in Sicily in 1897, immigrated to New York as a child. He didn't need headlines or flashy violence. Luciano was quiet, calculating. In the chaos of the New York gangs, he saw something others didn't: potential for structure. Where Capone saw opportunity in chaos, Luciano saw opportunity in control. Capone's domain was blood-stained streets and corrupt officials. Luciano's was boardroom meetings behind closed doors. While Capone fought for dominance in Chicago, Luciano dismantled the old guard in New York, eliminating bosses like Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. In 1931, he formed the Commission, a national council to settle disputes and share territory among the five families. It was the foundation of the American Mafia as we know it. Experts often draw a line between these two figures. Capone was the gangster in the spotlight, flamboyant, violent, impossible to ignore. Luciano was the architect, the man who turned a loose network of street gangs into a global criminal enterprise. Where Capone relied on intimidation, Luciano relied on strategy. The Prohibition era didn't create these men. It revealed them. It handed them a market that the government had outlawed, and they filled it with guns, bribes, and business sense. Capone brought terror. Luciano brought order. Each in his own way rewrote the rules of organized crime. Al Capone and Lucky Luciano were two sides of the same criminal coin, but the ways they played the game couldn't have been more different. Where Capone moved through the world like a battering ram, Luciano worked like a locksmith, quiet, precise, and nearly invisible. Capone's strategy was brute force. He ran Chicago like a warlord. His bootlegging network, spread across the Midwest, was protected by a private army of over 600 gangsters and enforcers. Rival outfits were not negotiated with. They were eliminated. The infamous St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929 was his signature move. 7 men gunned down in a garage in broad daylight. Capone was in Florida during the killings, but everyone understood the message. Challenge his control, and you die. Violence wasn't just a tool for Capone, it was his language. Luciano had a different vocabulary. He saw that endless turf wars were bad for business. He rose through New York's criminal ranks by thinking beyond street battles. He forged alliances with Jewish mobsters like Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel, partnerships that crossed ethnic lines, something unheard of at the time. Luciano didn't just want to run a gang, he wanted to build a syndicate. After orchestrating the murders of Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano, he took control and restructured the Mafia. The 5 families in New York reported to the Commission, which Luciano established in 1931. Disputes were settled by vote. Territories were respected. Violence, though still present, was reserved for when it served a purpose. Psychologically, Capone and Luciano were driven by different impulses. Capone had a temper, quick to anger and faster to retaliate. His need for dominance often overrode his strategic thinking. He demanded loyalty, but ruled through fear. Despite that, he also sought public sympathy. He ran soup kitchens during the Great Depression, posed for the press, and insisted he was just a businessman giving the people what they wanted. Luciano was colder. He didn't care about public approval. He didn't posture for cameras or try to sell a moral image. His world was one of calculations, not charisma. Associates described him as distant, methodical, and sharp. He believed in profit over pride. If someone had to go, they went. No flair, no mess, just a decision. Capone's empire was loud, built on spectacle. Luciano's was quiet, built to last. Capone wanted to be seen. Luciano wanted to endure. By the end of the 1920s, Capone's methods had made him a national name and a federal target. Luciano, in contrast, stayed in the shadows, letting others take the spotlight while he pulled strings from behind. The difference in their methods was not just tactical, it was cultural. Capone represented the old-school gangster, flashy, violent, impulsive. Luciano was the new model, organized, efficient, and dangerously modern. To understand the danger these two men posed, we have to look beyond body counts and bloodshed. Al Capone and Lucky Luciano both rewrote the rules of organized crime, but in radically different ways. Capone's violence was raw and visible. Luciano's control was silent and far-reaching. Each posed a unique threat, not just to their rivals, but to the structure of society itself. Capone's danger came from his visibility. He corrupted Chicago from the inside out. At his peak, he had the city's police force, politicians and judges in his pocket. He ran protection rackets, speakeasies and brothels, earning an estimated $100 million annually, a staggering figure for the 1920s. But it wasn't just about money. Capone made the city bend to his will through fear. Between 1924 and 1930, his outfit was linked to over 700 murders. Streets became war zones. Civilians learned to look the other way. What made Capone so dangerous wasn't just his firepower. It was the way he made violence feel normal. Gunfights in broad daylight, bombs in storefronts, assassinations during dinner hours. He turned organized crime into a kind of theater, with himself at center stage. And the audience, the press, the public, couldn't look away. That attention kept him powerful, but it also made him a target. In 1931, federal agents, unable to pin him on murder, took him down for tax evasion. His arrest ended an era, but it didn't end the game. Luciano, by contrast, understood that real power doesn't advertise itself. He wasn't interested in press photos or charity stunts. He wanted a system. After forming the commission, he helped transform the Mafia into a nationwide business. Each family controlled a region. Major decisions were made collectively. Disputes were handled quietly, often with bribes instead of bullets. Violence didn't disappear, but it became a tool, not a strategy. Under Luciano, the Mafia grew more stable, more lucrative, and more deeply embedded in American life. His reach extended into labor unions, ports, construction, even Hollywood. He managed heroin pipelines stretching from Europe to the US and laundered profits through legitimate businesses. Luciano's influence was less dramatic than Capone's, but far more dangerous in the long term. He didn't just terrorize a city, he infiltrated a country. Even in prison, Luciano remained a player. After being convicted in 1936 for running a prostitution ring, he was sentenced to 30 to 50 years. But during World War II, the U.S. Navy approached him for help securing the New York docks against sabotage. In exchange, his sentence was commuted and he was deported to Italy. From Naples, he continued to manage operations, coordinating global drug routes and influencing the Mafia for decades. Criminologists often debate who was more dangerous. Some point to Capone's brutality, the sheer number of lives lost, the way he crippled an entire city. Others argue Luciano's danger was systemic. He didn't just break laws, he built a shadow government, one that persisted long after his death. Capone burned bright, fast, and publicly. Luciano endured, and that endurance, quiet and unseen, is often the more lethal kind of threat. Al Capone died in 1947 at the age of 48. The man who once held Chicago in a death grip spent his final years isolated and deteriorating, his mind ravaged by neurosyphilis. He was released from prison in 1939, not because he had served his sentence, but because his body was failing. Once feared and untouchable, he died quietly in his Florida mansion, surrounded by nurses and regret. No empire, no power, just echoes of what he had once been. Charles Lucky Luciano, by contrast, lived longer, and in many ways stayed in the game until the end. Deported to Italy after his wartime deal with the U.S. government, he rebuilt his network from afar. He died in 1962 of a heart attack at Naples airport while preparing to meet with an American film producer. He was still negotiating his own myth when death found him. Unlike Capone, Luciano never lost control of the narrative. He shaped his legacy carefully, making sure the world remembered him not just as a criminal, but as a man who built something enduring. But legacy in the underworld isn't about memory, it's about impact. Capone's name is still famous. His image is plastered across books, films, and pop culture, but his model of crime, the flashy, brutal, high-risk style, didn't survive him. It drew too much attention. It left too many bodies behind. His version of the mob burned hot and burned out. What he left behind was a cautionary tale. Luciano, on the other hand, created something sustainable. His structure, the 5 families, the commission, still echoes through organized crime today. He didn't just change how the Mafia operated, he professionalized it. He taught the underworld that secrecy is strength, that power works best when it's invisible. Long after his death, that lesson remained. It still does. In comparing the two, it's not just about who spilled more blood or earned more money, it's about who reshaped the landscape more profoundly. Capone ruled one city. Luciano helped build a network that spanned continents. Capone was feared. Luciano was trusted. Capone made himself a symbol. Luciano made himself essential. And yet, both men thrived because the system allowed them to. The Prohibition-era created the perfect storm, a banned substance with massive demand, a government unable to enforce its own laws, and cities where corruption ran deep. Capone and Luciano simply filled the vacuum. One did it with bullets, the other did it with plans. Their stories remind us that crime doesn't always arrive in a ski mask or behind a gun. Sometimes it wears a suit. Sometimes it walks into a room and offers a deal no one wants to refuse. That's what makes their legacies more than history. They're warnings about what happens when greed finds opportunity, about what rises when power isn't watched closely enough. Capone made the world look. Luciano made it obey. And together, they changed the rules forever. Al Capone made headlines. Luciano rewrote the rules. One used bullets, the other used strategy. But only one built a system that outlived him. So here's the question. Who was more dangerous, the man with the gun or the man with the plan? If you enjoyed this story and want more deep dives into the underworld's most powerful figures, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode. Now tell us in the comments, if you had to face one of them, Capone or Luciano, who would you choose and why?